Okay, folks, we're ready to start. Councillor Dennis. Welcome to the meeting. I'm Councillor Steele and I'll be chairing today's pre-committee presentation meeting. I've got an echo. Please be advised that this meeting is being live streamed on the Council's YouTube channel. To introduce officers, to my left is the Planning Officer and the Council's Solicitor, and to my right is the Committee Manager. Also within the meeting room are the subcommittee members who are all present except for Councillors Arend, Talbot and Smith, who have given their apologies. Arrangements for this meeting: objectors will be invited to speak for up to half an hour. The applicant and his associates will be invited to speak for up to half an hour. Excuse me, I'm so cold. Members will then ask questions of the planning officers and a response to those questions will be provided as an officer update during the next subcommittee meeting on the 13th of January. So iPads, phones should be put onto silent and we will mute the microphones in between times. To avoid any disruption to the meeting, please ensure mobile phones and iPads are switched on to silent, and whilst you are not speaking, please put your microphone on mute if you've not already done so. And fire procedure: if the fire alarm sounds, you'll be directed where to go. Please follow the instructions given by the officers. Okay, so our first speaker is Miss Emerton. Emerton, just come up to the microphone there. You press the red button, that's it.
Thank you.
And you'll be given 5 minutes and I'll give you a reminder when 30 seconds remain.
Okay, so thank you very much for the opportunity to speak today. I've lived in Beverley since 1989 and I have two reasons why I have an interest in this. I did live down Minster Moorgate in a house that number 26, which backs onto the car park. So I have some understanding and experience of living that side of the car park. And I now own number 2 Lord Roberts Road, which is obviously number 2 and is directly beside the new proposed development. So I have a personal interest in this. My concerns are predominantly around the public toilets and the house beside East Riding Theatre and the loss of those, particularly the toilets. I feel that the loss of those public toilets would be detrimental to a number of groups in Beverley. One is disabled people, because those toilets have both the disabled and male and female facilities. Secondly, for coach visitors, because those of you who know that area, that actually on the corner where East Riding Theatre is, that's predominantly where the coaches stop and people come off, many of whom may be elderly and may need to use facilities. And as many of you know, the next nearest public toilets are actually in the centre of Beverley, down Dyer Lane. And we know that the pubs are not that keen on people just going in and using the facilities. Although I know people have said that there are places in the Treasure House and others, but they're not always open. So I think that the loss of the toilets would be detrimental to them too. There's also the market traders, both in, those who work from Wednesday Market. Where else do they, use facilities? And I know that the local authority and they don't have a responsibility to provide toilets, but it is good to have them, and it's good practice. And to be left with only 2 public toilets in Beverley at the minute is, considering the size of the area and number of people we have, is not brilliant, and to be left with only 1, I think, would be poor. In addition, there's the car park users who, may well have come from outside of town and need to use facilities, and so it's useful for them. And there is considerable footfall down Lord Roberts Road, as people who live and work around there know. My parents actually lived in the house across the road, number 10 Cross Street. So I'm up and down here a lot. I know what the footfall looks like, and those toilets are well used. I think that the loss of the house next door to East Riding Theatre would be a shame as well, because it doesn't look from outside as though there is much wrong with that house, and it is in keeping with the area. A lot has been knocked down round there, as you know, and that's a house. It's not particularly old, but it still has been there for some time, and it is in keeping, or more in keeping, with the local area. So really, my objections is that I can't see why either the toilet block or that house need to be destroyed and taken down in order to allow the development of the area. I absolutely understand that, and I know that the area needs to be developed, and it's been an eyesore and a problem for a while. So I'm not saying it can't be developed, but it's just that those two areas, the toilets and that house, should be considered and perhaps not taken down. So thank you very much for the opportunity to speak.
Thank you, Miss Emerton. If you just take a seat back there. Thank you. And then we have Richard Lidwell from the Beverley Civic Society. Press the button, please, Mr. Ridley. That's correct.
That work? Can you hear? Excellent.
Okay, just commence when you're ready.
Right. Thank you very much for the opportunity to speak on behalf of the Beverley Civic Society in objection to the current scheme. And I might add that currently I'm the chairman of the Civic Society and sit within the group that looks at planning applications throughout the town. I will open by saying that the Society endorses the previous speaker's objection to the removal of the public conveniences. As she has mentioned, these are well used and the nearest ones close to the busy Wednesday market, bus stop and the coach dropping off zone outside the East Riding Theatre. Although this is not really a matter for the developer, it is for the local authority. There is, as you know, there is no statutory obligation on the local authority to provide such conveniences, but surely there is a community obligation to provide them, and it should take this opportunity to improve the present building, or if that's not possible, to consider resiting in a nearby site. Secondly, the Society accepts totally that the site needs developing for the housing. That was a change from the local plan, which originally incorporated employment, but the need for that has disappeared. So housing is the acceptable way forward for that, as specified in the local plan. Thirdly, it approves the changed siting of the large car park to the west for East Riding employees, but with a substantial provision of space for the East Riding Theatre. This is an essential element for the theatre to enable them to take deliveries and loading and unloading equipment at any time for their shows, and which is a well-used theatre, as you probably know. It is expected that the new car park will be open to the public out of hours additionally, and in particular to the visitors for the East Riding Theatre. Although I carry on by saying the Society is very disappointed at the quality of the design of this proposal and has previously expressed the view that such an important town centre site should have been subject to a brief for an architectural competition to achieve the highest quality of development for our historic town. Indeed, the other infill development schemes in the town centre and around the Minster were the result of many hours of consultation, not only between developers, architects, planners, but also Beverley's own organisations and residents, in order to establish the principles of the development from the earliest possible stage. Examples of this you would be aware of is the Eastgate development, and previously the St Andrews Street and sheltered housing site to the south of the Minster. This present proposal, we feel, did not emerge from such an extensive process. Furthermore, the Society feels that the style and the layout is more appropriate to an out-of-centre suburban setting. The current design will do nothing to preserve or enhance the conservation area, which is predominantly Georgian and Victoria in character. This suburban style, we feel, is further reinforced by the amount of on-street parking as opposed to incorporating any parking within the buildings, as for plot 1 and opposite in Lord Roberts Road. While the new design is a small improvement, it still doesn't respect the grain of our historic town streets and housing. It further suggests that the proposed housing fails to meet the higher standards of design as expected by the current evolving East Riding Design Guide and national policies, with showing few references to the town's own vernacular building styles. Further, a surprising omission in our mind relates to the lack of information, as far as we can see, on the provision of modern standard environmental elements. For instance, the installation of heat pumps, solar panels, electric car vehicle recharging points, which we understand are becoming more statutory requirements for new builds. While the small green space at the centre is a welcome new addition, it fails to provide a public open space or square, being set well within the development and surrounded by the access road and dominated by car parking. I have number 11 here, but I'm not sure whether I'm up to number 11 or not. But a more publicly accessible green space could have been provided by widening further the frontage green area, incorporating the fine plane tree, which indeed should be subject to a tree preservation order, which surprisingly it's not at the present time. This arrangement would also help by reflecting the existing Lord Roberts public garden with its current distant view of the Minster. Such an arrangement would also present an opportunity to enhance the setting of the surrounding buildings and potentially creating, in the longer term, a more integrated shared traffic pedestrian zone with appropriate surfacing. In Beverley, attractive views of the Minster are in the main achieved by glimpses framed by buildings. A prime example of this is the view from the junction of Cross Street and Lord Roberts Road between East Riding Theatre and number 8, the former probation office building. This fine view is an open one and not detracted by the existing 2-storey building, which is going to be demolished, but will be replaced, we believe, by a 3-storey building, which could intrude on that view. The Society, for this reason, and as number 8, the former probation office, is not listed, although it's not listed, is an attractive building of its period within the conservation area and relates well to the theatre, and it recommends that this building be retained for conversion as for residential use. Another good example of thoughtful planning for enhanced views of the Minster is the Flemingate Shopping Centre, where new buildings frame the views. Of course, an older adjacent street, Highgate, achieves exactly the same result. This approach could possibly have been adopted here by designing more of a linear development. The Society hopes that the privacy of the Minster's secret garden will be well protected with tree planting, and especially from the south, where the 2 detached houses and garages are proposed. These 2 houses create a problem by having to extend the access road further through the development, increasing the adverse visual impact of hard surfaces. They will also overlook the garden, potentially reducing the privacy and exceptional nature and enjoyment of this attractive secret garden. Should plans for these 2 houses be taken forward, then we suggest using the potential access from the Minster Moorgate should be explored. In summary, the Society maintains its objection to this application and hopes that the Council will take a pause and encourage an alternative scheme which would enhance Beverley's status, much quoted nationally as one of England's best surviving medieval towns. Thank you for listening.
Thank you, Mr. Ridwell. Okay, we invite the applicant to speak. Is this Mr. Jennings? Is that correct?
Thank you, Chair.
Okay, Mr. Jennings.
Committee, afternoon. I'm Doug Jennings, the planning agent for the scheme, and with me is a local developer, Stephen Reynolds, who spoke to you at the committee meeting last month, and John Phipps, the architect, and Simon Chu alongside me from the Architectural Practice and Heritage Consultancy as well. Now, at the committee meeting last time, you were concerned that you didn't have clear enough details before you because of a small-scale black and white nature of the officer report. So we're pleased to show you this afternoon the scheme in an enhanced graphic display, and Simon's going to run through some slides later on. It's a difficult site to develop with competing opportunities and constraints, and these sometimes pull in different directions, and you'll hear more about these from others. Key matters for consideration are obviously the context, views of the Minster, and the character of the conservation area. Others are technical matters, such as the Highway Authority's requirement for 2 parking spaces per dwelling, and of course the modern building regulations. Some are council sales contract and local planning policy requirements, such as the need to retain the 50 parking spaces. And some are the need to provide for the operational requirements of the theatre and the rifle club. And I can assure you that a great deal of thought and analysis has been given to all these matters, as you'll hear, and to all consultee comments, taking them into account and resulting in many iterations in the scheme. It has been a very collaborative process with all the relevant officers of the council, as well as with Historic England and other statutory consultees. This is not an easy site, as I said, to develop, and balances are inevitable. But I believe what you have before you is a very good scheme that is planning policy compliant. And that is why we have an officer recommendation for approval. I probably don't need to say this to you as a planning committee, but it's not fair and will be completely contrary to how planning decisions should be made to say there is another scheme out there somewhere that you may like, because there isn't one. And that is not the application you've been asked to consider. So I'll pass you over to my colleagues, as I said, who will run through the scheme for you, explain its evolution, and specifically to explain the detail that you considered you didn't have before you last time because of the poor quality of the drawings in the committee report. So Stephen's going to go next, the developer, if that's okay. Am I right to stay here as long as I turn off the mic?
Good afternoon. I'm Stephen Reynolds, the applicant, head of CR Reynolds Housing Division. As Doug has said, today we aim to share our vision for this site. Now in its 5th year, this project has involved considerable effort, research, planning and adaptation in order to address the opportunities and constraints inherent within this site. In 2020, we secured this project through a competitive council tender, which ran for about 6 months. I believe there was various other firms that submitted schemes. And we provided a design focus plan, which aligned with the council's objectives and planning constraints. Subsequently, we won the tender. The council's selling brief required us to purchase and redevelop the entire site, ensuring commercial viability. retain the Grade 2 listed former chapel, enhance views of Beverley Minster, provide 50-space council car park, deliver a housing development which was deemed to be the most viable use of the site. Additionally, the council recommended using vacant building credit scheme to ensure commercial viability. And the land sale, as we know, included the public toilets, which the council has a resolution to close and has now relocated these to the Treasury House, as we all know. And this was a decision made independently by them, has no bearing on us. Upon securing the tender in 2020, we appointed Latham's Architects, a nationally renowned firm with expertise in planning and design of schemes within sensitive heritage and conservation environments. Working together, we've prioritised thoughtful, research-driven planning to address the site's constraints and opportunities to produce an appropriate design. This heritage-led scheme reflects input from numerous consultants, including Historic England and the council officers, to name a few, with the aim of creating a scheme that blends Beverley's character within modern building standards and design codes. Since the inception, the design has radically evolved as a result of changing stakeholder requirements. We've listened carefully to public and professional feedback and maintained a flexible and collaborative approach throughout. And today I welcome the comments made by the Civic Society, just as we did when they submitted their objections to our initial scheme back in 2022. We have made considerable efforts to change our design based on these objections and those of others. What you will see today is the result of balancing the needs and preferences of numerous stakeholders, including the Civic Society, within complex site constraints and planning requirements. As such, I have received a lot of positive feedback from members of the public who want to see the scheme go ahead. I'll now hand you over to John Phipps and Simon Chu of Latham's Architects as they discuss the design merits of our proposal. Thank you.
Good afternoon. Okay. Yes. So as has been explained by others briefly just now, our approach to the design here has been from the outset to try and understand the character of the site and its context. So as part of the initial submission, we undertook a comprehensive baseline analysis with a townscape and character assessment, which built upon your own conservation area appraisals and mapped all the constraints that we felt were applicable to the site. And from that, we developed a series of development principles. And the development principles were used effectively as a brief, which then informed the scheme, which Stephen described, which helped to win the competitive process. So apart from the commercial element of the competitive process, there was a design element to that. And we believe that our understanding of character and place was contributed to us winning the process. These are just a few examples of that, but it's essentially looking at issues of built form, distribution of open space, green space, the distribution of height, materials, etc., within the conservation area. And from that, developing a series of development principles, as mentioned. So if you go on to the next one. What's been mentioned previously, and some very good points raised by previous speakers, but in terms of the retention of number 8, for example, there was considerable thought put into that, and I believe one of at least half a dozen schemes that we looked at, and we must have produced 30 different options to get to one which is deliverable and of limited impact. But number 8 was considered to be retained, but the current scheme, which sees its loss, is supported by Historic England. They can see the heritage benefits of the scheme, which outweigh, in their view, as National Heritage Advisors, the heritage harm from the loss of the of number 8, which has no designation. Yeah, next one. So the things that we attempted to do here was reconnecting the site, which is essentially introspective and isolated at the moment, back into the as an active and vibrant part of the town centre. Look at a distinctive. What we're not trying to do with our proposals is to apply something which is essentially a mimicking the neighbours. The understanding of character, which I think your own design guidance and design codes would suggest, will lead to something which is very much of its time, but informed by context rather than copying it. Simon will talk about issues of sustainability, which have been raised by previous speakers. I think I can probably leave it at that. But the overall summary from which, if I could quote Historic England, is that they would recommend the scheme be approved.
I'm just going to take you through for a couple of minutes, or for the rest of the time, about 20 minutes, I think. A bit more detail of the scheme so that we can understand it in a bit more detail. So what we've got here is a very complex site. I'm not going to dwell on, well, I'm going to try and get through as much as I can actually, but we've got a very connected and constrained site in the middle of a very busy town centre. So the existing condition, as we all know, so I don't need to go over this, but it is very much an eyesore with the vacant properties, both number 8 and the care home, which have been like that for some time. The poor condition of the streetscape is sort of, you can see it in the image there, which is dominated by parking and poor hard landscaping. The rest of the site is similar in its lack of, it's not maintained, it's overgrown, parts of it aren't accessible, and the parts that are, which are, benefit in terms of the car park, which we're sort of retaining as much as possible, but there's blank gables, not active frontages, although there are some views inside the car park of the Minster. Overall, though, I hope we can all agree that there is a negative impact, and as people have already asserted today, that something does need to be done on the site. So from the outset, as John said, we've got a clear methodology of how we assess and consider our designs, and that always comes from context-led analysis, including that of the views of the Minster throughout the site, or along Lord Roberts Road, the public zone to the north that we can see the Minster from. So as the member, the chair of the Civic Society mentioned, it's often glimpsed views of the Minster. And actually from the Lord Roberts Road Gardens, you can see that that opens up into a panoramic. So we're aware of the impacts of development on this site, but it is only from portions of that garden that you can see it. You can see that number 8 actually does distort that view as you come around the corner, and you cannot see the Minster. So that further analysis considered how we're investigating what was there previously and the historic development of the road itself, which is actually a 20th century shortcut, so is not connected necessarily to the medieval landscape or the morphology of the town, but is very much a later addition. There is actually no precedent for development on the site, as you can see from the earlier maps. It was actually part of a woodland or orchard, likely associated with the Minster. It was only in the 1920s that the Baptist church, the listed theatre, was introduced alongside number 8. The character area zones that are defined within the conservation area appraisal, the site actually sits within 2 of them. And importantly, it's interesting to point out that the Guildhall area, I've sort of tried to highlight it, but I'll just read it out, that the special interest is the architecture is grander and less typical of East Riding vernacular. It uses more expensive materials, more stone dressings. So what we're trying to demonstrate here is, again, there's a lot of contrasting and quite complex design decisions to make based on very differing sort of zones, and we've taken that into account, considering its place within the wider Beverley, but also within these two different character zones, which are quite different. One is very much, it's called the Minster zone, and the housing along there is dominated by, you know, Highgate and Minster Moorgate in particular, and we'll go into that in a bit more detail. So as John alluded to, the research and analysis extended way past the site into considering the quality of spaces from routes and connections that we've already discussed, but very much the quality with regard to the conservation area in terms of Lord Roberts Road is actually quite poor, considering the hard landscaping and the parking that dominates that area. It's also very busy, as we know. The access to the theatre is also could be considered slightly unsafe in terms of it being right on the corner there. So that was something that we were quite conscious of trying to improve. Awareness of where all the listed buildings are as well. And alongside that, we considered the views and how that would impact on certain listed buildings. So within the our work heritage assessment considers actually impacted views, which were considered as alongside the conservation officer and agreed. So we looked at lots of different views. I'll come back to that. Just going back to the character though, you can see that actually this grander, it's less synonymous with what you would describe Beverley with the back of footpath development. It's a lot wider. It's car dominated with car parking. It's got a lot of trees and significant trees. The plane tree at the front that you can see at the bottom image is actually being retained and kept, and is actually, we're trying to link actually the Lord Roberts Gardens in with the proposal, which was a recommendation of the planning and conservation team. As mentioned, we did consider wider impacts from the main spots. This is all within the submitted application that you can view, and the limited actual impact on extent of development, which we'll come back to. But you can see that there are glimpse views of the site, but because you're only travelling down Lord Roberts Road, you don't actually get to see much of the site past the care home. What you can see is dominated by parking and poor quality condition, as we've described, and similarly, it does open up toward the west with the garden opposite. We're very conscious of this view and the panoramic that is afforded to the Minster, but in considering this in a bit more detail, we do think that, you know, there is part of this is of high value in terms of where you see the roofscape of the Minster alongside the roof line of the surrounding housing, but there's a significant amount of this the existing site which is significantly detracting from the conservation areas and the listed buildings. So briefly to discuss the site constraints, we've probably talked about most of them already, but it was just that this is just trying to sort of take you through our narrative. So the site is a very odd shaped site, so it's very difficult to develop as a result, really. We've got parking that dominates the site. Much of that is being retained next to the Theatre and Rifle Club, as mentioned. We'll come back to that. But the accesses onto that, onto Lord Roberts Road are multiple as well, especially as I mentioned, the one next to the theatre isn't great because you haven't got a lot of visibility display with number 8 blocking that. Much of the site is, well, it's vacant and inaccessible. We've got overlooking blank gables, access points, and overlooking windows to consider with throughout the site. So not only is the shape awkward, we've had to deal with a lot of site constraints, which also include a lot of vegetation. The back of the site, we've never even been able to survey properly the trees, but they're outside the boundary anyway. But there's 2 main trees, one to the rear of the theatre and one, the plane tree along Lord Roberts Road, which we are looking to retain. So overall, it's a really hard site to develop. So we've been constrained from the start, and considering what the analysis that we've done, that is how we take our design through it with a solid base of understanding, which was accepted by the conservation officer. So as a point of discussing viability and developable area and feasibility, this is just an illustration to mention that a one-story care home is not, well, I think we can all agree, is not very acceptable for the conservation area, and has always been a detracted from the setting of the Minster, despite the fact that it's afforded an interesting view, panoramic view of the Minster itself. So taking two-story development as something which is more akin to Beverley historic character footprint, just to consider where you might put development on the site. This is not what we've done necessarily, but this is just a reflection of the complexities of the design process. If we were to put housing at the back of footpath, like much of Beverley and the surrounding streets landscape, you completely obliterate the view of the Minster. So as a design challenge, if we start setting up back by 10 metres, 20 metres, and you can see where I'm going, 40 metres, and at the end 55 metres, you get back to where you might get to with the one-story development versus a even more setback 2 stories, which doesn't impact on the view whatsoever. The green area highlighted, therefore, if we're going to take that approach, means that that space is undevelopable or would become open landscape or hard landscape, which is going to be unmaintainable for the council or a developer, or indeed residents who would live on the site. But obviously it takes out a significant chunk of developable area. Therefore, our scheme is being considered in that respect, that there has to be a striking balance between the benefit of improving the site from its current condition, which we know is poor, to actually affording the view of the Minster and maintaining that from specifically Lord Roberts Road Garden, and we've done that by opening that that up from Lord Roberts. As discussed, there's been significant amounts of discussion and reiteration throughout the design process, and it very much is. This is a view before and after, effectively, of the from the shelter from the gardens opposite to the north. So the design principles that John discussed earlier are very simple, actually. The car park is to be retained, and therefore an access or an improved access is being put to the Lord Roberts next to the theatre. Access must be for development must come from Lord Roberts Road, as the rest of the site is actually not accessible. We did try and look at connecting to Minster Moorgate to the south, but this was not achievable due to private land issues, although there are gaps between some of the houses, but we did try and look for that because we wanted to increase connectivity, but that wasn't available to us. The views of the Minster, these were considered with Historic England and the Conservation Officer in terms of selecting specific views to maintain. The one from Cross Street is actually an improved view, we think, and I'll illustrate that later. This also included increasing visibility of the listed church. This did result in the loss of number 8, which was regrettable, but based on the following, this diagram, this is why. Part of some of the comments we had was about retaining the plane tree at the front, which is of ecological value, and actually enhancing the connection between our site and the Lord Roberts Road Garden. So as to enhance that green strip and sort of re-emphasize the character of the already established road, it isolated number 8 from the rest of the development, and there wasn't a way that we can maintain and connect that number 8 into a more cohesive development, because it is at the back of the footpath, when we've already illustrated why we could not have back of the footpath development. And so that, alongside the benefits of the improved view, or actually its limited impact on that view of the Minster from Cross Street, that is why it was removed, but with an added benefit of the better visible access to the car park. This creates a courtyard, an enclosed and overlooked space. The two properties to the south are there to bookend development. We didn't want a wasted bit of space which would be unmanageable and actually not very safe from security point of view. And we felt that actually defining that boundary between the secret garden and a house in private ownership would be of significant benefit and actually help sort of utilize that space, which is actually quite a dead space anyway, which is actually very hard landscaping at the moment because it's just a car park. So within that, this is all about the site layout. I'll get into the detail in a second. How long have I got? 7 minutes. So we're talking about good natural surveillance. It's enclosed. We'll go into detail about the hard landscaping and soft landscaping. It connects into the site and is very legible in terms of understanding and how you maneuver through the site. This is quite important in terms of reconnecting that site into Beverley. So just to touch upon character assessment of the area and picking up details and materials that were looked at. We've done this significantly within the existing context. We've looked at lots of different scenarios and what Beverley is akin to.
5 minutes remaining. Okay.
5 minutes. Okay. And then we've picked out 5 different attributes that we've tried to take forward in the design. One is the stepped ridgeline and eaves. Vertical rhythm set by windows and doors. Material colour and variation in roofs and facades in terms of slate, pan tiles, painted brick and facing bricks. Horizontal emphasis with sills and string courses and prominent entrances, all of which we have tried to incorporate within and be informed by the local character within our scheme. Material distribution in the roofs and the facades have been carefully considered with a variation of red brick and painted brick. Similarly with clay tiles and slate roof. Building heights have also been thought about. There are 2 portions of 3-storey elements, but they do not affect the views of the Minster from those viewpoints already associated. The roof lines are intentionally stepped to remove a blank facade and create a visual interest in the roof line, as you can see from this image. The house detailing has incorporated various elements already discussed in terms of slate and pan tile roofs. We have a blend of Flemish bond and stretcher bond and painted brickwork, all of which can be seen within the local vernacular and streetscape. We've got dental coursing to the eaves to increase the detailing. We've got high quality aluminium windows and rainwater goods. We've got prominent entrances made from cast stone to reflect similar idea, but in a more modern way. We're not trying to replicate what's there, but we are trying to emphasize the entrances that are lined with the windows above and Flemish bond brickwork in prominent zones. Soldier coursing, stone sills, all of which have been incorporated. The surrounding sills you can see on the right hand side are there to facilitate, maintain taller openings, but where there's bathrooms or kitchens, you need a higher sill. Therefore, that's been considered. And you can see how the vertical rhythm and horizontal rhythm has been established. We've also got chamfered entrances to Lord Roberts Road as you enter the site, as influenced by Wednesday Market. External landscaping, we have reduced the amount of car parking, which we tried to do, but we have been, that was agreed with Highways. The quality of materials was important, so it's been non-adopted roads to improve, and so we could have more variety of hard landscaping. And boundary treatments have been considered with many of the boundaries brick wall to existing external facing elements. The detail is here in the application. This is the the designed urban square within the development, where we've tried to minimise the amount of parking that you can see from the Lord Roberts Road. So the parking has been designed in a way to trying to limit that when considering the view of the Minster, and that goes and connects through to the commemorative gardens across the way. So all in all, this project deals with significant
1 minute remaining.
okay, I'll pass the significant constraints on the site, and we have considered views and impacts in our heritage assessment, including the cross street view, which you can see isn't impacted on the Minster view. And I'll just pass on to Doug for a closing statement.
In 30 seconds, 25. Well, I just hope you appreciate the depth of analysis that has been undertaken over the last 4 years. And we've shared the evolution of the scheme, which has changed because of comments received, particularly from the theatre, in terms of where you put the parking, where you put the housing. Through the 4-year process, we've ignored nothing or no one, including, or should I say, especially the civic society's comments. And I hope that what you see on the screen there now reflects what we've tried to achieve, which is a quality scheme.
And that's your 30 minutes. Thank you very much.
Well, there we are, a quality scheme in the middle of Bentley. Thank you very much.
Thank you, gentlemen. Yeah, could you just take a seat back in the public gallery, please? Right, members, I'm sure some of you may have some questions, but could you address questions to the officers, please? Maybe you have all the answers already. Councillor Casson.
Thank you, Chair and officers. On this development, I would like to have seen perhaps like a bay windows or the roof line split up a little bit more, chimneys, that sort of thing, to represent the slightly older parts of Beverley and the surrounding area. That's my concerns with this development. Thank you, officers.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Casson. Councillor Howard.
Yeah, I just wondered, was there anything ever considered for number 8? And we've heard about how that doesn't seem to fit in with the scheme, but it is a lovely building, and I just wondered whether there was anything ever considered for it apart from demolition.
I'll ask the planning officers to address that one. Is that okay?
Just as a clarification, this is not a committee meeting. So what we're trying to do is get some information from yourself and any clarification you need, so we can then bring that to the meeting on Monday. So that type of thing, obviously, she can raise then, and same with yourself, Councillor Casson. So if there's anything anybody else has got in relation to the scheme, this is the time that we can look into it before the meeting.
Thank you for that reminder. I'd forgotten that component. Not used to holding these meetings. Councillor Stewart.
Thank you, Chair. I've heard what Councillor Casson has said about chimneys, but on the reverse side, so to speak, what evidence have we got that these are, apart from air source heat pumps, what evidence have we got that these are, this is going to be a development that will last many, many years, whatever is developed on that site. And we must have materials that are going to be for example, solar panels, which can be very discreet these days. They're expensive, I understand, but they can blend in very well with the roof line. And I've seen, or maybe I've missed it, but I haven't seen much evidence of them being built to a very high standard from the point of view of energy conservation. Thank you.
Okay, anyone else want to raise questions for the officers? Yes, Councillor Robson.
Thank you, Chair. I didn't want to ask a question. I just wanted to express my personal thanks to the officer and to Michelle Bennett as well, for setting this meeting up. because if we were able to see in the kind of comprehensive detail every scheme that comes under our noses like this, we would be far better prepared to make decisions on these things. And I applaud them for that. And I thank very much both the objectors and the developers for giving us such a comprehensive view of what's actually happening here.
Thank you, Councillor Robson. I absolutely agree with your sentiments there. Anyone else wish to? Yes, Councillor.
Yeah, I suppose the one thing that I think I would like clarifying again at the meeting is that we have no control over the toilets.
Yes, I believe that was a decision that was taken before this anyway. Oh, Councillor Howard, your microphone's on. Been hearing all your thoughts there. No more questions for the officers that we need anything to come back to the next meeting? Sorry. Do I have any questions? No, I think anything that has been asked already. I was quite impressed by the presentation that's been given. We had much more information than you could possibly provide on paper. So no, thank the officers for arranging this. Okay. So, yeah, if that's it, we'll draw the meeting to a close. Thank you very much for those who attended. Very much appreciated. And we'll see you all at the meeting.